Volume, big playability, and efficiency. Which one of the next great running backs has all of that combined? Well, I'm going to break it down for you right now, and we're going to take a look at the top 20 most explosive running backs in this year's NFL Draft. Headliner Nation, we already broke down the top 20 most explosive wide receivers in a video just a few days ago. And if you missed that, make sure you check it out after you're done here. But now I'm going to hop into the top 20 most explosive running backs in this year's draft class. And what I've done is I have targeted 6 statistics that really help us find out who are the most explosive running backs in this year's class. Then I go ahead and put everybody in order of each individual statistic, and then we average them out, and at the end I'm going to share with you who comes out with the best score and thus the most explosive running back coming out of the draft. And I'll tell you what, if you don't know a whole lot about this draft, you're not going to want to stop watching this video. And it's also probably a really good idea for you to get your Fantasy Headliners draft guide right now, because we opened it up early this year and filled it full of rookie, draft, and dynasty content, and of course our redraft content will be posted in it later this summer. There's going to be a link down in the description below for you to go get yours right now for $21.99. But never fear, because I'm also going to give away one for free in this video. Just hit the like button and leave a comment down below with which running back you feel is going to be an under the radar sleeper pick for drafts this year. And if we get 500 likes, I'm going to pick one person in the comments to give a draft guide to. But that's enough of the sales pitch. Let's go ahead and hop into it. I'm going to take a look at the volume stats first, and of course that means carries. There are going to be some names that show up on this list that you're going to have no idea who they are, and we're going to try to figure out whether or not that means they could be successful at the NFL level. And Kamani Vidal out of Troy is first up on the list. Out of this draft class, almost 300 carries last season. And then of course right behind him, Blake the Great, Blake Corum, and that high-powered rushing offense of the University of Michigan national championship team. He also ranked up there in all the volume stats. But then a guy like Isaiah Davis shows up out of North Dakota State, and he's definitely one that you're going to want to keep your eyes open for the rest of this video, because his name is going to rank very highly the rest of the way. Now, some of the higher ranked running backs in this draft class are actually a lot lower when it comes to the amount of carries from last year. Now, Jonathan Brooks was on his way to probably being at the very top of this list for the University of Texas, but in November against TCU tore his ACL and is still working his way back from that. But then at the bottom, you've got guys like Trey Benson, Jalen Wright, Marshawn Lloyd. All of them are seen as explosive backs in this draft class that maybe didn't have the amount of volume last year that you would have thought. So let's go ahead and move on to rushing yards. Vidal leads his second category of the video, ranking number 1 for rushing yards last year, but that Isaiah Davis, he came in right behind him at number 2. Audric Estime took quite the hit with his value after the combine. It definitely was not one of the best performances of the week, and honestly was one of the worst. And after that, a lot of people started to devalue him quite a bit moving down the board, especially considering the fact that from an agility and speed standpoint, he wasn't anywhere close to the way that he plays in game. And I have to admit, I did not love his combine performance, and because of that moved him quite low in my rankings. But I might be bumping him up a little bit after seeing some of the numbers in this video. And while rushing yards don't paint the entire picture, we'll take a look at those efficiency numbers here in a few minutes. Blake Corum had the 2nd most rushing attempts and the 5th most rushing yards. And again, in that offense in Michigan, when they ran the ball repeatedly, that's not surprising at all. Now, we should take a look at some of the biggest differences from rushing attempts to rushing yards, because even though we didn't put yards per attempt in this video, we can still take a look at which one of these running backs ended up being the most efficient. And unfortunately, in terms of inefficiency, Frank Gore is going to rank right up there as the top running back for that category, because even though he ranked 5th for rushing attempts, he only ranked 12th for rushing yards. But Kyrie Robinson out of San Jose State, who was 13th in rushing attempts, was 9th in rushing yards, and Bucky Irving out of Oregon, who was 11th in rushing attempts and 7th in rushing yards, ended up being the most efficient running backs in these two categories. All right, who had the biggest nose for the end zone? Let's take a look. I don't think it shocks anybody that Blake Corum is first on this list with 27 rushing touchdowns. The all-time rushing touchdown leader at the University of Michigan found the end zone more than any other running back in this video. And all but 5 running backs found the end zone double-digit times last season. But there is one name that I'm very interested in bringing up, and it's my running back one in this class, Jalen Wright. Jalen Wright only found the end zone 4 times this past season. Now, his volume numbers are not all that great. And honestly, when you take a look and watch him play on tape, he reminds you a little bit about Alvin Kamara, who also at the University of Tennessee could not get on the field very much, no matter how well he played. But if you have any concerns about Jalen Wright, we're going to squash those right now. Let's move on to some efficiency categories, starting with yards after contact per attempt. Because last season, Jalen Wright averaged 4.35 yards after contact per attempt, second best among these top 20 running backs. A surprise name at the top of the list is Tyrone Tracy Jr. out of Purdue. And while he didn't score great in this video, he also scored pretty well and is a name that we should probably be keeping our eye on either in the later rounds or potentially being an undrafted free agent. Estimate has another good showing here in another category, finishing 4th in yards after contact per attempt. And when you watch him on film, he absolutely looks more like a brawler and a bruiser than he does a type of running back that's going to utilize his speed and acceleration to break huge plays. And he's going to be one that will be super tough to lock in because there is a good chance that he could turn into a decent NFL running back. And when you take a look at the stats here, it absolutely backs that up. But for me personally, when I watch him on film, I just don't see the oomph that I need to put him as a true NFL caliber starting running back, but we'll discuss that at the end of the video a little bit more. If you're a member of the channel and you're in Discord, you already know that this guy is one of my favorite under the radar backs of this draft class, Isaac Guerendo out of Louisville. And even though he didn't have the best numbers in terms of the volume categories, we do see him make a little bit of a jump up here in the efficiency stats. And based on what we see from the film, it doesn't surprise me that he's this high up in yards after contact per attempt, because this is a guy that will run you over, turn on the boosters, and then pull away from everyone. But I also think it's really interesting to note the difference in rushing attempts and yards after contact per attempt, because there was only 3 running backs to finish inside the top 10 of most rushing attempts and inside the top 10 of yards after contact per attempt. In fact, 4 of the top 5 guys in rushing attempts fell inside the last 6 of yards after contact per attempt. So let's move on to missed tackles forced per attempt and see if those numbers do the same thing. And Jalen Wright with another good bounce back here in this category as well. After finishing outside the top 10 in the first 3 volume categories, he's firmly inside the top 10 in the first 2 efficiency categories. But one player that's really interesting to talk about is Blake Corum, who for the 2nd straight efficiency category finds himself at the very bottom. Now, when we move on here in a minute, you're going to see his big time runs are also ranked 20th. But a lot of people forget that Blake Corum went down with a knee injury towards the end of the 2022 season. And actually, it probably ended up costing him a Heisman while he was at it. But he didn't really show the same burst, the same explosiveness that we saw back from the 2022 season when he returned for this year. And the numbers seem to really back that up, because in 2021, he averaged 3.84 yards after contact per attempt. And then in 2022, he averaged 3.25 yards after contact per attempt. This season was a huge tick down from those years. And then in 2022, on 248 rushing attempts, he had 73 missed tackles forced. This year, he only had 30 missed tackles forced on 258 carries. And our next category that we'll talk about, he also saw a 9% drop off in that category as well. The knee obviously wasn't the same, but the question is going to be, will he gain that explosiveness back when he gets to the NFL, or will it continue to be a problem? The one thing that's really good about Blake Corum is his vision and his ability to hit that one cut and get upfield. He's still going to be a really good NFL running back, but if he doesn't get back some of that acceleration and ability to break break tackles, it could end up being a little bit of a lower ceiling than what we would like to see. All right, the final statistic that we're going to take a look at is big play percentage. And this is going to be the amount of yards that came on runs of 15 or more yards. And Marshawn Lloyd, Trey Benson, and Jalen Wright are all right at the top, 1, 2, and 3. Guys that are considered top draft pick options at the running back position in this draft. My boy Isaac Guerendo, he fell in at number 7 overall with just under 50% of his yards on those big time runs. And then one name that's interesting to note is Bucky Allen out of Oregon. A lot of people thought that he would be a bigger time running back prospect than what we've seen. And Bucky Allen does do some things well in the run game, but unfortunately he's going to be undersized and probably not as heavily utilized in the NFL. So the question becomes, do we see a bump up in that efficiency production from him, given the fact that he may not see as many touches? Is he moved out to wide receiver? Does he play in the slot? What will the team do with him? All right, now that we've covered each of the 6 categories that go into the final scoring, let's take a look at final scores. And keep in mind that the lower the score, the more explosive that they are. This is an average of where they finished among the 6 categories that we've talked about. And what did I tell you about Isaiah Davis? I mentioned him at the beginning of the video and then brought up to everybody that you're probably going to see his name pop up the rest of the show. And sure enough, here at the end, he leads all of these running backs with the most explosive score. Now, when you play for a school like South Dakota State, unfortunately, sometimes you get labeled as the type of running back that may not translate to the NFL level as well. Now, even though Isaiah Davis scored very well here, I don't know what type of an NFL career he has in front of him. He lacks a lot of the athleticism that would be needed in order to reach really high levels as a running back in the NFL. He's going to be a guy that's going to run over a lot of people. He's going to break some tackles. He's going to make some guys miss, but he doesn't really have the acceleration and the breakaway speed needed to give you big play home run threat at any time on the field. Audric Estime comes in at number 4. And again, I mentioned that he was a guy that when I first did my evaluations and when I looked at what he did at the combine, I wasn't really feeling it. I was not excited. But after seeing these scores here, I'm definitely giving him another look and potentially could move him in my rankings. But with like a lot of these guys, I do think it's going to depend a lot on where he lands. And very similar to Isaiah Davis, I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to have the athleticism, the burst, and the top end speed to make big plays happen consistently at the NFL level. But he definitely could carve out a role as a short yardage guy or some sort of a supplemental back that definitely could still have value. And Kamani Vidal, who we talked about leading the first 2 categories, ends up inside the top 5. Now, we saw a little bit of a drop from the first couple of categories down as we went further into the efficiency categories, but he'll also be a name to watch. Now, Jalen Wright, who is my RB1, and Jonathan Brooks, considered another one of the top running back prospects in this class, fall just outside the top 5 here. And once again, we kind of talked about it with Jalen Wright. He did very well when it came to the efficiency categories. It was just the volume that he lacked in to push this score higher. And if you've been around a while and bought our draft guide in the past, you've heard me talk about my dynamic running back rating. And when we take a look at that, the difference between volume and efficiency, and Jalen Wright would be a guy, when taking a look at his efficiency here, is somebody that I would definitely mark down as being a potential breakout candidate at the next level. Now, 3 of the top potential running backs in this class fall into the 3/4 mark here in the average overall score. And I'm way more concerned about Marshawn Lloyd and Trey Benson ranking this low than I am Blake Corum, because we've seen Blake Corum be efficient in the past and be able to hold a high volume along with it. Unfortunately, again, coming back from that knee injury this past year, it just didn't work out that way. But Marshawn Lloyd and Trey Benson are both considered home run type of hitting quarterbacks. And if they're not being heavily efficient at the college level, I do have some worries about them becoming ultra efficient at the NFL level. Now, unfortunately, Braylon Allen just didn't do that well in overall score. The youngster out of Wisconsin that made a name for himself as a 17-year-old freshman that looked like a 25-year-old veteran in the NFL, just has not unfortunately put together the type of career that you would think a Wisconsin back would have that would propel him up to being a top draft pick. Allen's going to run over a lot of people, but I don't know if he's going to do a whole lot more than that. Now, in terms of overall score, Isaac Guerendo was definitely a disappointment to see here, but I want to take a look at those efficiency categories where he finished much higher than he did in the overall volume categories, which when you talk about him and Jalen Wright, he didn't finish as high as Jalen Wright, but there's still some of the same qualities there that we'll keep an eye on. Well, Headliner Nation, hopefully you all appreciated another deep diving statistical video. Make sure you hit the like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and leave that comment down below so if we get 500 likes, you've got a shot at a free draft guide. And if you've missed any of our older videos, YouTube is recommending the wide receiver video to you right now that goes over all of the same things. So if you missed that, make sure you go check it out. But for now, I'm out of here, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliner.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same.